If you follow mixed martial arts, you'll probably know that recently Alex Pereira, the light heavyweight champion, has stepped up on short notice to defend his title on what was supposed to be the massive Conor McGregor return pay-per-view, UFC 303. Now that's a badass move, putting your world title on the line on short notice to fill in on a card that, well, I mean, desperately needed a new main event. Taking short notice fights is kind of part of the sport, really. You know, sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes even champions have had to accept a short notice opponent. But what I'm talking about today are examples of truly any time, any place, anywhere, where champions who weren't even scheduled to fight put on their superhero capes and saved the day. And of course, one person who is making an appearance on this list, Alex Pereira, our lord and saviour for this weekend's card. You can now play as him with his custom shorts and his golden gloves in EA UFC 5 ahead of UFC 303. This is all a part of UFC 5's massive June DLC update, which is of course completely free, where we're also getting another 15 fighters added to the roster. Did I say free? I meant free. It's free. And if you're still on the fence and you haven't yet dipped your non-broken little toe into UFC 5, Conor's model is also getting an update in the game as well. As well as all of that, UFC 5 is also releasing an Ultimate Edition. Coming with that are going to be 6 new Hall of Fame alter egos. That's including guys like Vandy Silva, Chael Sonnen, and even Anderson Silva. There's going to be 3 brand new legendary fighters added to the game as well. All of the alter ego bundles that have already come out, including the Prime and the Pride ones. Legends like Mike Tyson, Fedor, Muhammad Ali, they're all going to be in the Ultimate Edition, along with a bunch of other stuff as well. So if you want to know more about the Ultimate Edition, click the link in the description. Also, to celebrate one of the biggest UFC 5 updates ever, we are giving away copies of the game. Stick around to the end of the video to find out how you can win, but all the info is in the description down below. Let's go back to the video. I'm Bailey and from MMA On Point. Shout out to all of you channel Hall of Famers out there. You're the real heroes, okay? And these are 10 champs who stepped up to save massive events. Number 10, Cyborg saves UFC 222. Initially, on paper, UFC 222 was going to be a banging show from the fight capital, Vegas. Despite what Roadhouse might have told you, it wasn't the card where Dalton made his UFC debut, but it was going to be the place that we were going to finally see Max Holloway and Frankie Edgar throw down for the featherweight title. They were supposed to fight at UFC 218, but Frankie got an eye injury, so they pushed it to 222, and this time Holloway hurt his leg exactly 1 month out from the show and had to drop off the card. Without a title fight to headline the pay-per-view, the UFC reached out to TJ Dillashaw and Cody Garbrandt to try and book the Bantamweight Championship rematch from a few months earlier, but TJ said he'd just had a baby, he wasn't in training camp, and he didn't think Cody deserved a shot. And this is the same guy who fought with one arm, is it? He instead called out Mighty Mouse, which was quite exciting, but that guy was injured and there was no way he was jumping up on 1 month's notice. So a few days went past with still no headliner for 222 until February 7th when the UFC announced that Cris Cyborg was going to make a short notice title defense of her featherweight championship.
The first thing I tell my man, why you call me? I'm in vacation. Don't call me, I don't want to fight, I don't want to break.
Look, I mean, if you're under contract with the UFC, I wouldn't bet on a peaceful vacation anytime soon.
It could start coming in my mind, maybe. And I call my manager in the morning and say, I want to fight.
Props to Cyborg, though, for stepping up on just 1 month's notice, putting her title on the line, and, you know, she ended up smashing through Yana Kunitskaya in the first round, and pretty much just saved the event. Number 9, Pitbull keeps Bellator alive. Look, you might not watch any Bellator MMA or know any of their champions, but you've got to give major props to one of their multiple-time champs, Patricio Pitbull. Okay, he made his Bellator debut in 2010, and now in 2024, he's still fighting for world titles. After trading the featherweight title backwards and forwards for the best part of a decade, in 2022, Pitbull decided to go down to bantamweight and try and become champ. He fought Sergio Pettis, he unfortunately lost, and then a month after that fight, jumped all the way up to lightweight to fill in on short notice in Ryzen, where he ended up getting KO'd in the first round. Still kind of saved that show as well anyway. Almost a year after that, and we still hadn't seen Pitbull make a return to MMA. The merger with the PFL happened, and a matchup for Pitbull just didn't seem to be on the table then either. They went ahead and planned out the first Bellator event under the PFL banner, the Bellator Champion Series 1. It was going down in Dublin. Liam McCourt was going to fight the Irish star Sinead Kavanagh in the co-main event. It was going to be great. But of course that fight fell out and they kind of needed a bit more oomph on the card. And that was when, pretty much out of nowhere, Pitbull announced he was going to fill in on 3 weeks' notice and defend his featherweight title. He was taking on Jeremy Kennedy, who was already scheduled to fight on the card and apparently was getting a free title shot now, but this was Pitbull coming off the back of 2 losses, one of them was a KO, and he had a lot to lose in that fight. But he showed up at the event, and in the 3rd round, melted Kennedy against the cage.
Jeremy Kennedy surviving, and how?
Oh, this is it. This is it.
Pitbull with the victory!
Number 8, Daniel Cormier saves 230. Alright, we've got to talk about what was happening at UFC 230, an event that seemed, pretty much cursed from the get-go. First of all, it was going to happen in New York, alright, at Madison Square Garden, historic venue, and the UFC only go there with a big show every time. But up until about 1 month before, they didn't even have a headliner. Most of our attention was on the co-main event anyway, that was going to be Nate Diaz versus Dustin Poirier. Nate even suggested that it should be for the new 165-pound title, something that Dana was just not on board with, and so Nate just kind of pulled out of the fight. Don't worry though, because a few days later, the UFC announced that Valentina Shevchenko would be headlining against the Ultimate Fighter winner, Sijara Eubanks, for the vacant 125 Women's Championship. And to make that, they had to pull both girls from matchups they'd already been scheduled in. We didn't have too much time to complain about it though, because almost immediately that fight was cancelled as well. So with basically no options left on the table and a New York pay-per-view to headline, the UFC managed to convince Daniel Cormier to make a short-notice title defense of his heavyweight belt against Derek Lewis. Now, DC had actually hurt his hand in the Stipe fight only a few months before and was gonna let it heal, but then the UFC called and he told them, he literally told them he wasn't ready to fight, but he still agreed to fight Lewis anyway. Probably because that man got paid. Even worse though, DC nearly pulled out on the day of the fight after he sneezed and pulled his back, and the original headliner, Sijara, she stayed on the card and missed weight, so that wouldn't have been a title fight anyway. 230 was a bit of a disaster, and it honestly could have been so much worse if it wasn't for Mr. Daniel Cormier. Number 7, Nick Diaz gets an unfair fight. Hey guys, Nick Diaz is coming back to fight a ranked welterweight in 2024. What a world we live in, eh? Back in 2011, this guy was on top of the world. He'd just beaten the Dream welterweight champion, collected the Strikeforce title, was on an 8-fight win streak, and was perhaps the hottest commodity outside of the UFC. He started 2011 by beating old rival KJ Noons and defending his Strikeforce title one more time. He ate a few shots in that fight as well as some leg kicks, and he thought he was going to get some time to recover. And at this time, Strikeforce are running their heavyweight Grand Prix, and the next leg of the tournament was scheduled for April 9th. But President Scott Coker announced just 1 month out from that he was pushing the date back to June and to a much bigger venue in Dallas, admitting that he kind of just ran out of time to find a place that could support the spectacle of the heavyweight tournament. But that meant the April 9th show had lost its headliner, and on just 1 month's notice, they booked Nick Diaz to defend his title against Paul Daly. Now, kind of ironically, most of the fighters on this list stepped up to save events out of, their own goodwill, but Diaz, he almost did it out of resentment.
If you fight me too much, I'm not going to be the one to back out of these fights. Nobody gives about me. They're over here throwing me in a fight after fight after fight. They're like, oh, this guy will knock him out. We'll get rid of him like that. This isn't fair. If you call that a fair fight, I know people think that's a fair fight. That wasn't a fair fight. I just fought. I kicked up in the leg. I go out there, what's the guy do? He tries to kick me right in my leg.
At the end of the day, it turned into one of the best one-round fights of all time, and he even made a fan out of Dana White. I'm pretty sure Nick didn't want to be the hero, but he still saved the day. Number 6, Vanderlei becomes a heavyweight. Everyone loves a bit of pride fighting championship. Over in Japan, they had massive shows and for a while had probably the best fighters on the planet. Their middleweight champion for pretty much that whole time was Vanderlei Silva, who went unbeaten at middleweight until he lost to Ricardo Arona in the 2005 middleweight Grand Prix. Now, they rematched a few months later and Vandy defended his belt and was still the middleweight champion. The next Grand Prix tournament Pride arranged was a 2006 heavyweight Grand Prix that brought together a roster of just insane talent who were all going to go head-to-head, and the Pride heavyweight champion Fedor Emelianenko was going to be a part of it until he picked up a hand injury, which doctors said wouldn't be healed in time for the July 1st start date. But on about 1 month's notice, the middleweight champ Vanderlei stepped up to the plate and joined the heavyweight tournament with 7 of the biggest, baddest guys on the planet. Honestly, everyone was sad that Fedor was out, but Vandy was a real wild card entry. He'd fought heavyweight before, but the concept that he could win the whole thing and be a champ in 2 weight classes was pretty appealing. He even became the first man to knock out Fujita in the opening round, but ultimately ran into a head kick from Krokop, which actually left him unable to compete in a UFC vs Pride matchup with Chuck Liddell, so you win some, you lose some, I guess. Number 5, Shin Aoki rolls the dice. If you don't actually know who Shin Aoki is, do yourself a favour and go and watch the essay we dropped on the man, okay? It still bangs. What you do need to know is this man has had a long career in martial arts and he is still fighting. Actually, he just choked out John Lineker in January after he filled in on 1 day's notice. He was there for the rise, the peak and the fall of the Japanese MMA era and has been competing in ONE FC ever since that promotion got started. Now, after 15 years of professional MMA in 2018, he put together a 3-fight win streak, and the following year, he was somehow getting a chance to win a 4th world title. He got the first round submission and once again was world champion after nearly 4 years without a belt. And then just 5 days later, he stepped up immediately to put it on the line. You might not have actually seen many of ONE's shows, but one you might have sat down to watch was ONE Enter the Dragon in May 2019. It's when Sage Northcutt was making his debut, Gary Tonon was back to do more MMA, and it was going down in the Singapore Indoor Stadium, but it didn't really have a main event. A few fights then also fell off the card, and with little to no hope in sight, Shinya agreed to step up and headline on just 1 month's notice, and put his newly re-won title back on the line. He was taking on the young phenom Christian Lee, and unfortunately in this case it didn't pay off for Aoki, who ended up getting TKO'd in the second round. This guy's taken a lot of short notice fights in his career, and it just goes to show, champion or not, this man will fight anyone. Number 4, Figgy risks it all. In 2017, the UFC flyweight division was introduced to the God of War, Davison Figueiredo, for the first time, and 3 years later, he'd rampaged through the division and was the world champion. Now, given that it takes a while to get to the belt, and then it's probably even harder to defend it, the last thing you expect of any champion, just like Shinya, is to turn around and risk the belt you've won by taking a short notice fight. But when things go as badly as the planning did for UFC 256, yeah, the promotion can be pretty persuasive. The Vegas Apex event was supposed to be headlined at first by Usman versus Gilbert Burns for the welterweight title, but Usman had pulled out 2 months before with undisclosed injuries. The UFC had time though, and instead tried to book Amanda Nunes versus Megan Anderson for the featherweight title, but just 1 month before the pay-per-view this time, Nunes pulled out as she also had an undisclosed injury. So the co-main event, Peter Yan and Aljamain Sterling for the bantamweight title, was bumped up to the main event spot. But 2 weeks after that, Yan pulled out for personal reasons, which turned out to be visa issues. So with little to no choice, the UFC turned to Davison, who did something no champ has ever done. After just defending his new belt at UFC 255, he was now going to fill in and headline UFC 256 on 21 days notice. All in all, 256 had to deal with 9 fight cancellations, mainly because of COVID, but Figgy totally stepped up to save the card and fight Brandon Moreno. It ended in a draw, but he's still got the record for the shortest turnaround as a champion. The God of War is always ready to fight. Number 3, Old Man Volk gets off the couch. I don't know how many people predicted the dominance of Alexander the Great Volkanovski, but after 4 title defenses, he was pretty undeniable and looked so goddamn good, he was even holding on to the number 1 pound for pound spot. That's when the UFC smelled a money fight and booked him to go up a weight class to challenge Islam Makhachev for a second belt, but he gave the Russian fighter his toughest test in the octagon. Now, he didn't win, but it was so close he didn't lose his number 1 pound for pound spot either. The rematch was definitely a fight we all wanted to see, but instead Alex dropped back down to 145 to defend his belt against Yair Rodriguez. Now that was a dominant win for the champ, and after that kind of performance, when would we see him at lightweight again was a little unclear. Meanwhile, at 155, Makhachev was going to rematch Charles Oliveira for his second title defense. Olives had just beaten Dariush. It was going to be great, but 11 days before the event, Charles suffered a pretty terrible cut and had to be pulled. The phone call went to Volk, who jumped at the chance to rematch Islam. On 11 days notice, Volkanovski had the confidence to get in there with the other best guy on the planet and at the same time give the pay-per-view a title fight. Now, Volk wasn't really risking his own belt like some of these other guys, but he was still risking his reputation as the featherweight champ, the number 1 pound for pound spot, and unfortunately he got KO'd by Islam in the first round, and then again when he returned to defend his featherweight belt. It's unfortunate how it played out, but he got tons of respect for stepping up to save the event. Number 2, Reiner de Ridder is legendary. So we're going back to one championship for this guy, the Dutch Knight Reiner de Ridder. Sounds like a folk hero, basically is an MMA folk hero. He won the middleweight championship back in 2020 as a 13-0 undefeated submission expert, and he took it off a guy called Aung La Sung, who you might know him. He made history and won, becoming a champ of middleweight and light heavyweight, which is obviously not easy to do and not something many people replicate. That's when de Ridder said, hold my beer. After losing his middleweight title to the Dutchman, Aung La N Sung was set up to defend his light heavyweight belt against Vitaly Bigdash in a trilogy fight headlining a big show that was also going on TNT. Eddie Alvarez was going to be on the card, Shin Aoki was going to be fighting Sage Northcutt, even Sexy Armour was going to be there. But then it all started to fall apart. First 3 weeks out from the event, Akiyama had to pull out with an injury. Then the following week, Sage Northcutt failed a COVID test and also had to be pulled from the card. Then during fight week, just 4 days before the show, Vitaly also failed a COVID test and the main event was gone too. But the Dutch Knight picked up his sword and on 4 days' notice jumped up a weight class to rematch Aung La N Sung, this time though for his light heavyweight title. It went all 5 rounds this time, but by the end of it, the Ridder was a champ. Never has the phrase, "You're taking everything I work for," been more appropriate. Number 1, Alex Pereira is Batman. If the UFC did have some bat signal they shot in the sky these days whenever they needed someone to come and save an event, it has to be in the shape of that stone head thing. So UFC 300 was amazing. Damn right near undeniable as the best card of all time, but Dana really promised something crazy for the main event, and up until like 2 months before, we didn't even have one. Seemed like McGregor wasn't coming back in time, John Jones was injured, Ramadan was still happening. If Alex Pereira hadn't stepped up to fight Jamal Hill, well, the BMF title fight would have been not that bad actually, but there would have only been one title fight on this historic UFC 300 card. And Alex had to give up fighting in Brazil at 301 to be a part of it and save the day. No sooner had he got done with 300 though, he was once again filling in for Conor McGregor. 303 was supposed to be the Irishman's big comeback, but everything was completely derailed by a toe injury, which you think wouldn't really cause that many problems. I mean, ironically, Alex Pereira is filling in for Conor and he also had a toe injury, but he seems fine. So for the second time in as many months, Poatan was going to defend his world title. It was also, again, a situation where pretty much every other champion was unable to step up, especially because, well, it was supposed to be a Conor McGregor event, a massive show, and Alex definitely carries some star power. While a lot of people spend thousands on tickets to see Conor, seeing Alex Pereira is still pretty goddamn good. I gotta say, it has been pretty awesome getting all of this International Fight Week content for UFC 5 for free. So, in celebration, we're giving away copies of EA UFC 5 on PlayStation and on Xbox. If you want to get your hands on a giveaway code, you better check the description because they're there right now and it's first come, first serve. Literally all of their paid content today, including the 2024 Hall of Fame inductees with their new alter egos, the new UFC legends, Tyson, Fedor and Ali, all of the new content updates and every fighter drop they've done, all for much less than it'd be to buy it all separate. Get the Ultimate Edition and it has it all included. It's the best deal EA has put together, so click the link in the description to find out more. Shout out to all of you Hall of Famers out there as well. By the way, thank you for supporting the channel, the content. You guys are the real champions here. If you want to join them, guys, it's just $2.99 down there. You get unedited access to all the podcast episodes if you've seen them on here, if you like them. Writers meeting, other stuff. It's just a way to support us as well. If you feel like you want to support us, we love the extra support. It's very supportive. I feel supported. Shout out to you, Luke, for editing this video, mate. Thank you. We appreciate you. You can check him out at call2me_ guys. That's his social media. Or if you want to check out his YouTube channel, him and his mate, they make videos about gaming and stuff. If you did like the video, thumbs up's always appreciated. If you want to see more from us and you aren't subscribed, subscribe. It's right there. You'll get notifications about the next video so you never, ever miss one. Thanks, guys. I've been Balian. Appreciate you. Thank you for watching. You listened to me. I held your attention this whole time. And now we're just going to close it in. All right, there we go. See you in the next one, guys.